Hello students, in this video we will try to understand what is taxonomy, binomial nomenclature, identification and classification. As we have already seen in the previous video that the living world consists of diverse life forms and humans have been curious and fascinated by this living world. In earlier days, human beings had to find sources for their basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter. Hence, the earlier classifications were based on the uses of various organisms. So, it is extremely important to study different organisms, identify, and name them according to our convenience, which also means we need a science to study all these features. Such a science is taxonomy. So then, what do we understand by the term taxonomy? Taxonomy is a basic science which deals with naming, identification, and classification of an organism like plants, animals, or even microorganisms. Taxonomy helps us to categorize these organisms into different taxa or groups based on certain characters. What are these characters? These characters may be morphological, genetic, behavioral, ecological, biochemical, etc. Now the question is, who coined the term taxonomy? The term taxonomy was coined by De Candolle in 1813. There are experts who work in the field of taxonomy. They are called as taxonomists. What is the job of a taxonomist? The job of a taxonomist is to study the external and internal arrangement of an organism along with cell structure, developmental processes. The taxonomist not only studies these characters but also studies the ecology around the organism. And all these information that he gathers helps him to identify, classify, and also name that organism. As we talked about taxonomy, there is another term involved which is called as systematics. Systematics is a branch of science which deals with distinctive characters of a species and also their relationship with other species through time. I repeat, also their relationship with other species through time. So, what does it mean? It means that it is a science which deals with evolutionary relationship. In Latin, the word systema refers to systematic arrangement of organisms. You know what? Systematics was used by Linnaeus in his famous book Systema Naturae. Systema Naturae. Now, we have already talked about taxonomy, where we mentioned that it deals with naming of an organism, right? Naming of an organism, that is nomenclature. But then the question that arises is why name them when they already have a common or a vernacular name? So, if we look around, there are millions of plants and animals around us. These organisms are called locally by different names at different places. For example, mango, it is called amba in Marathi in Maharashtra, Aam in Hindi, Mavu in Kannada, that is Karnataka, and mangue in French, so on and so forth. So, because one fruit has so many names, it may create a lot of confusion, right? To avoid this confusion, it is extremely important to standardize names of an organism. For this, an organism should be known by the same name everywhere. That is, an universally accepted name. This kind of naming is termed as nomenclature or binomial nomenclature, which refers to name of a species is given by a name which composes of two words. For example, common name is mango. Mangifera indica is a scientific name. So Mangifera indica, it is two words. In order to name an organism, it is very important to identify them. So identification in biology is a process of assigning a pre-existing taxon name to an individual organism. In other words, identification of an organism to individual scientific names may be based on natural body features such as color, shape, size, etc., experimentally created individual markers, and nowadays even molecular markers are available for identification. So now when the process of identification is completed, the next step is to name an organism. Naming of an organism is called as nomenclature. When the name consists of two words, it is called as binomial nomenclature. So this naming is always based on certain rules which are laid or framed by a group of scientists. These rules are accepted by the researchers all over the world. There are two main organizations who framed the rules for taxonomic research in the field of zoology and botany. They are ICZN, which stands for International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, and ICBN, which stands for International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. There are other organizations who also deal with nomenclature in bacterial, viral, also cultivated plants. These organizations see to it that each organism carries only one name, that describing any organism at any place should lead us to a single name, and that no name is repeated for previously reported organisms. When we name an organism, there are few basic principles laid for binomial nomenclature. They are: the foremost criteria is that the name should consist of two parts. The first, a generic name, and a second, specific or specific epithet. This was proposed by Carl Linnaeus in his book Philosophia Botanica, and he also used it in books like Species Plantarum for plants, Systema Naturae for animals. Let's take an example. Mango, which is called by the name Mangifera indica, where Mangifera stands for generic name and indica stands for specific epithet. The names should be Latinized or derived from Latin. So then the question is, why only Latin? It is because Latin is an international language which no more exists. So the names remain unchanged through generations and are not subjected to grammatical changes. The next criteria is names when printed should be in italics or separately underlined. And when handwritten, they should always be underlined separately. I repeat, always underlined separately. As you can see in the slide, Homo sapiens, when underlined together, is a wrong method. But when underlined separately, it is a correct method. The next criteria is the generic name always starts with a capital letter, as in case of Homo, H is capital, and species name with a small letter like sapiens, S is in a small case. Name of the author who described it first appears after the specific epithet and is always written in an abbreviated form. For example, Mangifera indica Linn. Linn here stands for Linnaeus, Carl Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus was considered as a father of taxonomy and was the first one to use binomial nomenclature for organisms. But later on, Lamarck proposed a trinomial nomenclature to name the living things at a rank lower than species. This system consists of three-part name system. That is, the first one is a generic name, second is a specific name, and the third is a subspecies name. For example, human, the scientific name is Homo sapiens sapiens, and the domestic chicken, Gallus domesticus. In case of plants, the word subspecies is replaced by variety. In the next video, we would be discussing about classification, taxonomic categories, and taxonomic hierarchy. Thank you.